for today. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with some introductions, and we're going to dig into Microsoft's forum strategy, some of what happened at SharePoint Conference. I've got a few slides from Microsoft themselves in terms of what they presented at SPC in Vegas earlier this year. And we're going to dig into that roadmap. We really want to understand where Microsoft's coming from and help you understand some of those solutions that even Microsoft is evolving and helping people understand what those are. There's not any major sneak peeks we can give you, but we can at least tell you kind of how this evolution is happening. And I think what's something we've got special today is really being able to see this smart forms and this module from Kintivo. And then we want anybody who has questions, especially as we go along, and if there's any questions at the end, please do use that form. The little chat window, we'll be able to see those. So please ask any questions you've got, whether it's about the product, whether it's about enterprise strategy as a whole, as it relates to forms and helping people. I'm sure a lot of people have the same questions you do. So definitely, we're going to be saving a good 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So let's dig in. I'd like you to understand who we've got here today. And let's understand a little bit who Kintivo is. And okay. Sean, will you tell us a bit about?
Absolutely, Joel. Thanks. My name is Sean Bordner. I'm the CEO of Kintivo. And a little bit about ourselves, real quick, is we've rebranded. We were recently formerly known as SharePoint AMS. You've probably seen or spoke with us at conferences, and we're really excited about that. We have a larger brand now. It's called Kintivo. And basically, our team has been working with SharePoint since Team Foundation Services way back in, I guess, 1999. We target our solutions on solving common problems. That's really what we're focused on doing. Here's some of our smiley faces on the left-hand side of the slide, and some of our SharePoint-based add-ons on the right-hand side. Website's Kintivo.com. I guess one of our most popular products is the Smart Forms module for SharePoint. That's what we'll be showing a little bit of today. It's pretty popular. It's used by hundreds of organizations worldwide, and it's really a great example of a tool that does solve common problems, and that's what we're really all about. This is one of those form solutions that we'll be covering today, and we have other SharePoint-based solutions that fill common gaps, as you can see on the right, like e-commerce, mobile, member management, authentication, email and maps, and so on. But today we're really going to focus on solving the problems of SharePoint forms. So real quickly, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Sean Bordner, and I am the CEO of Kintivo. I live in Virginia with my my beautiful wife and 3 kids, and we actually live in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. If you're familiar with the Appalachian Trail or Skyline Drive, that's our stomping grounds. I've been doing SharePoint stuff for, gosh, almost 1.5 decades now, I guess. Joel, has it really been that long since Team Services? Is it 1.5 decades now?
It's getting there. It's wild. It's crazy.
Showing my age there. So I've worn many hats. I've been blessed to be a developer, a solution architect, a consultant. I've been active in the awesome SharePoint community. Actually presented at the very first SharePoint Saturday ever. That was at Virginia Beach. That was really cool. I didn't know it was going to blow up to be what it is today, but that was really cool being part of that. I co-authored a book called SharePoint for Nonprofits. You can find that on Amazon if you happen to be in the nonprofit world. I do have other interests outside of SharePoint. Believe it or not, I love the outdoors, mountain biking, hiking, camping, basically anything you can think of that you can do outside. And I'm a very amateur wildlife photographer. If you're interested in sharing wildlife photography with me, there's my photo stream up there. You can find me on Flickr as well. And lastly, I do enjoy traveling very much. But you know, no one I know travels more than Joe Olson, and I'm delighted to be presenting with him here today. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Joel Olson.
Hey, thanks a lot, Sean. It's great to be speaking with you today on this awesome topic. I'm excited to be here. I've been working with, we talked about SharePoint and how old it is. It actually makes me feel old. I was the first SharePoint administrator hired at Microsoft back in December of 2000. IT was actually a little bit reluctant to get started. They were like, what, you want us to put a beta up as production? It was this fascinating kind of paradigm of how do we get a product started inside of IT at Microsoft. Some interesting give and take. But I've been working with SharePoint since those very early days, and over time I've just loved to be able to share what I learn in all my variety of experiences, both at Microsoft and with a couple of different vendors, and done some consulting. And I recently joined up with BA Insight, definitely one of the top search vendors, if not the top search vendor in this space. And it's very exciting for me to be drilling in on search. I think that's one of the biggest themes in SharePoint 2013. But more about my background, I love to build communities. I love speaking at user groups. I love helping people find other people and finding answers to their solutions. It's another reason why I like doing these webinars, is because it really gets me new exposure to new people and people around the world. That's the great thing about webinars, is how global they really can be and are. Love to travel. Travel is one of my biggest passions. I think that I travel so much it does create a little bit of a rub with my family, but I'm trying to find a good balance. I've been to most of the world, and a lot of the time when I'm traveling, it is connecting with SharePoint communities and building new communities and speaking at SharePoint Saturdays and SharePoint events around the world. My blog, my primary blog, I used to be SharePointJoel.com. With all this Office 365 and Yammer stuff, I rebranded that as CollabShow.com. My travel blog is Traveling Epic, because every travel experience I do is definitely, I try and do it to the fullest, and it creates these epic stories. And BA Insight, my employer, and definitely reach out to me on Twitter. I love connecting with people. So without further ado, I think it's time to really dig into this. And I definitely looking for some dialogue here with Sean, who's one of the premier experts on this topic of forms, and helping customers understand forms and solutions as it relates to customers and enterprises that are really trying to gather data and gather information across both with their customers and their partners, and really digging into this. So we're going to start off with the current state of InfoPath. And some of you may have seen this picture. This is one that floated around. This is actually an image from SPC. In fact, it is a bit of an odd picture. I think for me, I think it's hilarious. Some people are like, oh, this is kind of a somber moment. But yeah, it's this moment where essentially Microsoft decided that this was the end of life they were gonna set up the end of life for InfoPath. And as a result of this, we really wanted to help Microsoft get the message out there that InfoPath really is, whether you say it's dying or dead, essentially it definitely invokes these kind of feelings of, well, what are we going to do? What's our strategy? And I think that was one of one of the reasons why I kind of pushed to do this funeral, was really this idea of, let's make sure that this message goes big and broad so people can understand what's really happening here. Even the latest version of InfoPath there was really no enhancements to it. It was really kind of just another packaged version of InfoPath 2010. And so really it's been on this path of Microsoft's looking to build more of these strategies into the web and into their client apps. and then there's been some gaps that third parties have been able to fill around building these forms and solutions. And that's what we really want to dig into. But the first thing really to understand is there was a big major announcement around InfoPath Dead at the SharePoint Conference and kind of leading up to it. And as well, Microsoft was really using SPC, this SharePoint Conference, earlier this year to reveal what their strategy is and start to get some feedback from customers. So let's dig into that a little bit. A few quotes. There's a link to the blog here from Microsoft's Office blog, from the Office team. We're retiring InfoPath, investing in new forms of technology around SharePoint, Access, and Word. And really it's across the Office technologies. And we're going to dig in a little bit on the variety of technologies here. The other thing to understand is, back when InfoPath was built, people were primarily using these forms on their desktops. And so the technology has really changed, and Microsoft's really trying to get behind this idea that, well, there's a lot of variety of different clients, and so using ActiveX, not the greatest idea. So I think that was part of this idea is this need to go to mobile. And then another quote from that blog, we're looking to make investments that allow you to easily design, deploy, and use intelligent, integrated forms across Office clients, servers, and services. Forms that everyone can use across their PC, tablet, or phone. And I think that's part of this. You say, well, why this move across from InfoPath? Well, InfoPath, when it was first designed, was a client. And so you had this kind of rich experience for being able to fill out these forms using the InfoPath client. And then I think it was between that transition of 2003 to 2007 InfoPath that you had a lot more of that ability to publish to the web. So that was kind of the web-based forms. And then between 2007 and 2010, those web forms became that much richer, and so there was less reliance on the client. And because the first version of the web forms that InfoPath was publishing, they were really kind of weak. I'll just be honest with you. I think they were pretty weak. But with 2010, it really started bridging that gap. But with HTML5 and with the mobile explosion, the BYOD, there was a lot of concerns around, well, how can we build a responsive experience? How do we build this mobile experience? And so it became less about a client and kind of deploying that the connectivity and building these forms with this forms builder. And I think Microsoft really wanted to get more around this idea of building for mobile and building this rich web experience. And if you could build a rich web experience, it kind of gets you away from that need for a client. And I do recommend that anybody on here, if you haven't read that blog post, it's really important to understand that. And there's a couple of them since that time. And then at the SharePoint conference, we got a little bit, a bunch more information that starts to clear the air a little bit around, okay, InfoPath's dead. They're kind of not necessarily investing more in it. But let's understand this roadmap, and let's dig into this a little bit. So the first thing to really understand is there is a technical product roadmap here, and Microsoft has focused. This is a Microsoft slide, and if you haven't seen the presentation that was done at SPC, it is available on Channel 9. Sonia, who's really in charge of this strategy at Microsoft, presented with a couple of her colleagues from Microsoft at SPC, and the session was Update on InfoPath and SharePoint Forms. It was a packed session. I think they even had to shut the doors, but it is one that through Channel 9 you can track that one down, whether you're looking for the deck or even the recording. So what I want to help you understand is really this idea that they broke it down in terms of different types of forms. So first type of form is really this style of kind of like an Excel survey where it's data-driven. in terms of like the cell-based surveys. Then the list forms, the structured documents, and then full-on applications. So they broke it down to those 4 different types of structures. And then it kind of takes you into what are the scenarios for those variety of form types. Well, with Excel, they really decided that they wanted to kind of have this Excel-style experience, whether you could use the Excel as a client and then be able to publish that into the web. The idea is really people are kind of used to using Excel for data gathering and being able to quickly fill out information, whether it's a bunch of checkboxes or whether it's updating numbers with calculations and with kind of Excel is really powerful. In fact, it is the biggest BI tool in the world. It's important to understand in terms of usage. Excel is really powerful. Now, understanding where Microsoft's taking it, they're on this approach to let's continue to enrich the server side of this Excel experience. And the idea is this online continuous shipping with Office 365 experience. Now you've got Excel online. You've got Excel for iPad, for iOS. And yes, there is an iPhone version, an Android version, nice reading capabilities. But that iPad version, wow, you definitely got to check that out. I think the latest number was 27 million downloads for across the Office applications. So definitely got to check those out if you've got an iPad. And as well, just understanding this path for Excel. A lot of what's being done around Excel is these variety of rich clients that are being built up in the mobile experience and tablet experience, but also in understanding the Office online experience, which is Excel in the web, in terms of being able to present up these forms and in kind of understanding that scenario. And lists, I think, is another thing to really understand. Now, lists really are a couple of different ways to look at it. With lists, we're talking about data in SharePoint. It's kind of like the SQL database of SharePoint. SharePoint, instead of having databases, has lists. That's how data is stored. And those lists can be structured in a variety of different ways with some light integrity in terms of being able to fill out forms. Now, what SharePoint's done is it's actually gotten a lot richer in terms of inputting data into SharePoint lists, and as well in terms of connecting that data to back-end systems. You may be familiar with your ability to connect the SQL database even to present up these external lists so that people think that they're filling out a SharePoint list, but where in actuality that data is being pushed into, or it's being stored in SQL databases. And in today's world, we're actually talking about Azure databases, where SQL Azure can be your storage. So with this move to the cloud, it's important to understand Microsoft's approach really is this idea of creating a thinner and thinner layer and keeping away from those heavily customized scenarios. And where you do need to customize, you're doing that in the Azure layer. The other thing is this idea of, they call it fossil, but it's basically forms on SharePoint lists. And investments, essentially, in making the forms experience a lot richer in terms of fill out your data and it's backed by a SharePoint list. And we'll continue to see more releases from a SharePoint perspective with the updates to Office 365 as it relates to later this summer and with even a further out 2015, but definitely expect to see an even richer experience of working with SharePoint lists with SharePoint vNext, with SharePoint 15, codename 15. Now, the next one to understand is structured documents. If you're familiar with Adobe and PDFs and those style of forms, there's been a lot of rich things that happened with Word 2013, with the client, and your ability to be able to take in even a PDF, an existing form, and then be able to turn it into a real form where it actually collects data, and that data being pushed into other things. In terms of, if you have somebody fill out a Word doc, it's quite unstructured. Well, with Word and these new capabilities of building forms within Word, it can actually be very structured and much easier to receive and be able to pull the data out in XML and a variety of different things in terms of creating a much structured experience right out of Word. And so basically you get these Word forms. And there's even a developer experience around these Word forms that's important to understand as it relates to the Word 2013 ribbon. But as well, definitely expect and understand that there'll continue to be more investments with Word Online, with Word for iPad and iOS, essentially this tablet experience, but also in understanding this offline experience of being able to fill out a document in Word, and then that being able to be shipped and then data extracted. And the last one is understanding apps. And I think the apps is really, it's a very broad category, and I think we're going to continue to see, and we are going to continue to see investments in this. Today in 2013, a lot of this is accomplished through Access. Access being the ability to kind of build these no-code solutions right in SharePoint and build kind of very, very rich experiences with the validation you're expecting, but also being able to push data into other systems and doing your connectivity from that mechanism. Also, don't forget BCS, that business connectivity services when you're building apps. Obviously, there's more restrictions on what you can do in the cloud as it relates to Office 365, but also in understanding that Office 365 has some of these capabilities of being able to work with some of this data, but there'll be continuous investments and continued work around making these richer and richer as it relates to both the BI and reporting perspective with, say, Power BI, but also in relation to the connectivity and being able to work more with Azure in terms of storing your data in Azure.
Before we go,
yeah.
Sorry about that. Sorry for interrupting. I do want to, there's been a question here, and I think right now might be a good segue into a question, this particular one, if you don't mind me asking it now. And the question is this: can we use forms to pass data to other apps? Sample scenario, use a form to select a location name, then pass that location to other apps for filtering and search purposes.
Yeah, I think location-based data is actually a really, really cool scenario. And in terms of passing data, I think there's some JavaScript considerations in terms of cross-domain scripting. But if you're talking about web services and in terms of passing it from a storage perspective, I think one of the great aspects is that in SharePoint 2013, some of the aspect around being able to store location-based data in lists. I don't know if you wanted to add more on that, Sean.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that would be that's what the session is about, because not one size fits all with your form requirements. And so when you have a requirement like this, you got to look at it within the context of where you want to have the solution. Is it on-premise? Is it in Office 365? Because there's certain boundaries no matter where you're at. And where do you want it to go to, this data? Does it need to live in an Azure database or elsewhere? So hopefully, as a result of today's presentation, you'll be a little bit more informed. And we're certainly going to follow this up with emails, with read more information, learn more information. Some of the things we'll reference here, you'll be able to dig in a little deeper even after the presentation.
Yeah, I think as well, this app forms category of forms really is quite broad, because we're talking about with SharePoint on-premise, you can build, crazy apps. There's there's no limit to what you can do on-premise. The other side of it, looking at looking at what you can do in Office 365, those APIs got a lot richer, and they started talking about the new object model in terms of working with the client object model, but also with new APIs that became available, some new cloud APIs, and in terms of even building apps, I think that we're not far off from some additional announcements around applications. And the thing to understand here is really, in Office 365, we're going to continue to see announcements and new APIs as it relates to applications. I mean, just look at Oslo, and that's now called Delve, in terms of APIs that are becoming available, and in terms of this application functionality of being able to push data at users. I think that's some really cool stuff that will be available to apps.
Yep.
So speaking of continuous improvement, we have to kind of go back to understand the context of this a little bit, in terms of this was presented at the SharePoint Conference in March, and from there they mentioned some investments between 3 to 6 months from the aspect of cascading combos and SharePoint list workflows, and trying to make things more user-friendly as it relates to Office 365. I can't speak to. I know that there's a lot of little things that have happened behind the scenes as it relates to lists, but I'm not sure I could speak to any of these individually. Do you know, Sean?
No, I do not. We'll have to do some research on that and shoot it out to folks.
Yeah. I would say this is one where, unfortunately, the ability to know exactly, things kind of, it seems like things kind of happen behind the curtain a little bit as it relates to Office 365. There's a lot of little things that happen continuously. These releases, they're not getting packaged up like you might expect, as it's not like a big service pack that rolls all these things up. So there have been changes to lists, I can tell you that. But in terms of specific features and functionality, I think it's important for you to kind of keep your ear. I think that's why the community is so important, is because if you have specific questions, it's almost easier to ask them on Yammer or on Twitter, in terms of pinging the community and being able to get answers as it relates to apps you may be building. This aspect of what's a year out, basically by next spring, Microsoft has kind of committed to continuing to do more around mobile, and more around APIs around Office 365 and those kinds of objects. And I think we will see more business rules and logic for sure as well. But across all these things, you can see things kind of look somewhat tentative, and they keep asking for input. That is the case. Microsoft has been, they've committed to a number of things, but also this is a moving target. There's a lot of things where they'll try stuff out, and inside of Microsoft IT, where a lot of this dogfooding happens, a lot of this kind of early betas happen, and there's even groups of customers that get early access to some of these bits, but really it's access to their tenant would be on early releases of this stuff. And if stuff breaks, if stuff isn't what the customers expect, it may never make it all the way out. Does that make sense? This idea of continuous release, continuous improvement is such that things that make sense and that become popular and loved make it out. Those things that cause problems don't. Now, speaking on this later, I think it's also important to understand enterprise data, definitely super critical. What does that mean? I think it's talking more around better access in the cloud to enterprise data and a little bit better APIs, but I think it's because it's so restrictive today, and these are the harder things to do. E-signatures, there are some great third-party solutions that are out there now that's important to understand, but so far some of these things are missing today in terms of your ability to get these things built into your forms.
Yeah, and I attended that session there, and I'll tell you, I was impressed with the way that they made no bones about it. They very much wanted our feedback. They wanted our feedback and our input, and they mentioned it throughout, from start to finish, throughout the entire presentation.
Yeah, I think it was something that was repeated more than anything else, was that idea that they wanted to hear from us. They really wanted feedback. They wanted input. So let's dig in that next layer in Microsoft strategy as it approaches forms. And before we do, another good blog post is this one that talks about the update on InfoPath and SharePoint forms, the URL there at the bottom. And I picked out a few of the things from that FAQ. Especially this number 2 is really, really important. How long will InfoPath be supported? The InfoPath 2013 client will be supported through April 2023. Sorry. Now, what does that mean? When we say InfoPath is dead, but then they say they're going to support it through April 2023, well, let me first tell you, yes, if you bought InfoPath client and you're running it, Microsoft will continue to support you and your use of that client, but that does not mean that they will continue to work against newer versions of SharePoint. Okay? That's the important thing to understand here, is if you're using InfoPath 2013 against an on-premises server, you're good to go with, as long as that's, say, SharePoint 2013, you're good to go. You can continue in that scenario until 2023. But if you're looking at, hey, we're going to upgrade to 15, yeah, you're not going to be using your old InfoPath against the new version of SharePoint, and there's not going to be a new version of InfoPath. That was the last version of InfoPath, and that's number 1. Will there be another one? No, there will not be another version of InfoPath. So when we say it's dead because it's the last one. They've set its end of life as April 2023, and you can refer to the life cycle policy there. Those who, there's some customers that are out there that are like, you know what, we just barely upgraded to SharePoint 2010. Guess what? Those are not the guys who should be worried about end of life of InfoPath 2013, because they haven't even gotten there. They're very likely running. They just barely got off of SharePoint 2007 and InfoPath 2007. Now they're rolling out the new clients for 2010, or they may be pushing out the 2013 clients and be running on older versions of the server. So really, a lot of this planning, and when it comes to enterprise strategy, has a lot to do with, you may not be impacted today. You may not be impacted in a year. You may not be impacted in 2 years. But it's important for you to understand this InfoPath guy, there is not another version. When you're building forms, when you're building requirements into your form strategies, it's important to understand what your clients are using and what they will continue to use in the future. And this is, while it is kind of a heads up, yeah.
Sorry, a question just came in, and just to reiterate, the question is, can you confirm that the next version of SharePoint will not support InfoPath?
I believe the answer is yes, and I would love to back that up with a Microsoft blog post. But yes, that is my understanding.
That's my understanding too, as well. And I mean, that's pretty much what happens when they say it's the end of life. It means they will not be advancing the bits anymore. So if there's a single thing that they have to do to InfoPath to make it compatible with the next version of SharePoint, it will not be compatible.
Right. Right. And the other thing to understand there often is just that it's like, just because it is, just because they said they're not going to build another one doesn't mean it won't. It might work in some scenarios, but they're not going to be testing it. Does that make sense?
It'll be where some things won't work anymore, and some things will still continue to work, maybe.
Yeah. And in fact, I think that part of the interesting scenario here is people who are using Office 365. Well, when is InfoPath going to stop working against Office 365? I would love to hear an answer to that one. So that's one of my own questions is there some date in the future where they're going to say, because the interesting thing is with Office 365, they're already running new bits. We already know that. There's new bits being pushed out there all the time. Well, at what point will they say, you know what, with this new update to the list, you can no longer use this list type against InfoPath? At this point, we haven't run into that. So I think there's a little bit of hope in terms of InfoPath against SharePoint 15, but again, no guarantees, and I will let Microsoft share that message. I don't think we've gotten a lot of clarification as to when this wall drops, where it's like, nope, don't be using InfoPath against this stuff. But essentially, what we're looking at now, when you use Office 365, you are seeing a lot of, in terms of binaries, the new binaries are behind the scenes. It's going to be different. The on-premises server will be different, but different but the same. It's kind of like that. And as well, I'm happy to, I'm going to dig into this question a little bit, see if I can get Microsoft to give an even stronger message around both Office 365 support as it relates to InfoPath, but also SharePoint 15 as it relates to InfoPath. Anyway, sometimes they don't like to comment on the new version of SharePoint, but I think if we can get them to address it as related to kind of like number one, that would be very nice. And I think we can strong arm them into giving us an answer.
Yeah.
All right. So let's dig into some of these solutions that Microsoft says we should be using. The first one is Excel surveys. So what we're looking at here is an Excel 2013 survey. And the idea is you've got this little form where you can fill out data and it auto-populates your Excel form. That's a pretty simple one, but it gives you that idea that you can get offline. You can be saying, hey, everybody fill in your T-shirt sizes, and rather than saying, here's the fields, you can have a much richer form where that data gets pushed into Excel. And as it relates to data connectivity, there's even more capabilities for connecting Excel to your backend.
Yep. I would add, if you don't mind, I'll chime in here on each and every one of these very briefly, and I'll try to point out, if I can, some pros and cons. So, with Microsoft Excel 2013 forms, that I see this as breaking down into two distinctly different paths. You got path one, where it's the Excel 2013 desktop, which is basically creating a worksheet, calling it a form, and sending it out, not unlike Microsoft Word 2013 forms or PDF documents, right? You get it out there, and you mentioned this earlier, it's kind of unstructured. It comes in. Excel's a little bit more structured because it actually comes into a, Excel file. But then path 2, which is Excel 2013 web app, which is getting pretty interesting, that currently can be used to create some surveys. Chris Webb has a great post about this and walks you through it all. But unfortunately, right now, this will be worked out, but right now the web service is still a little bit flaky, and it might frustrate some of your users until Microsoft gets it polished, and they will. And the pros here, I guess I'd break down into path 1, the desktop version pro as well. It's an Excel file. Everyone loves making spreadsheets, and it's easy, and it's not scary, and it works. But it is pretty much like sending out a PDF form that you fill out, and you get all that back independently, and you have to do something with all that. Now, path 2 with the web app, it's a good concept using web apps. I think they're on the right path. It's going to be pretty sweet one of these days, and you can surface the form, a collection piece on a real web form, and it does introduce the concept of a central repository when it comes back into an Excel 2013 file, which is pretty cool. So the cons, I guess, would be it's just not fully baked just yet, and not all the forms that you will be building are going to be surveys. Microsoft will work that out, and I'll share with you afterwards. We'll send out an email with Chris Webb blog post that is really good and walks you through this if you want to play around with it.
Yeah, I kind of see this as this is collecting data. It's fill out the form, and we're going to collect data. It's not going to do. This is when you talk about when is a good example of when to use this. This very likely isn't going to have a lot of your business rules in it. This is very likely not going to be one that's connected to a workflow, as an example. This is one where it's, I need your T-shirt size, or hey, tell us what your interest is, or it's kind of that gathering data, which is I think why they're using the word survey, because it really is this kind of data gathering aspect. And the reference to OneDrive, SharePoint, and Office 365 is the idea that host your Excel up there, and then when you pass around that survey, the link to the survey, people are filling out the data, it's populating your file, which you can then take offline, carry with you, but it's going to continue to gather data up on SharePoint or OneDrive or Office 365. All right, enough about that one. List forms. So with SharePoint lists, there was some new capabilities in terms of being able to build, and this is basically SharePoint. SharePoint's really the thing that we're talking about here in terms of forms. When you create a list, your ability to move things around and gather data, you get a bit of form validation out of the box. But in terms of creating a decent looking, these aren't the richest, but they give you some capabilities in terms of this is the data that is my list. These are the fields that I care about, and then being able to have people fill them out. Not a lot of customization, kind of lightweight customization in terms of what you can do with gathering data from a list. I have seen a lot of cool work with people building CSS and HTML5 on top of these, where it can be quite rich, but it's all client-side object model, and it's people building code on top of SharePoint lists, client-side code.
Right. I'm a big fan of keeping your SharePoint data in a SharePoint list. It's very maybe simple logic that I subscribe to on that is, if you're wanting to build a SharePoint form, why would you not want your form to put the data in the SharePoint list? And so I like a lot about the SharePoint list forms, especially with 2013. They're native to SharePoint, and they're used on every list. They're already done for you. They pop up when you click on Add New Item. This is obviously the default display. Every single list has one of these, but every one of these guys has exactly a one-step form. And without doing some of the customizations you just mentioned, Joel, it's going to look like every single column in your list, and sometimes it can be daunting. It's going to show up for every single person that comes here I would say the pros to the list forms is going to be you do have field validation because it's going to honor the list column if it's a number or a date or a drop down, or if it's required or not required. You can even have regular expressions. You can do powerful stuff pretty easily there. It does have a central repository of data, which is your SharePoint list, which is huge to me. And you can take full advantage, and this is the biggest key. You can take full advantage of all the SharePoint capabilities, like the reasons you got SharePoint to begin with: email alerts, workflows. SharePoint has a tremendously powerful workflow engine you can do stuff with. Versioning, records retention, stuff like that off the top of my head. But once you get that data into a SharePoint list, you can do a lot with it. You can export it to Excel. You can work with the data using Microsoft Access to build reports and run queries against your data even. And some of the cons that you've already pointed out, I guess I'd add to would be, it's a pop-up format. It's not always desired. I think that most folks, if you don't want to teach them SharePoint or scare them with the user interface, when they think of a web form, they're accustomed to a web page with a form on it. And that's not exactly this experience. The design isn't necessarily mobile friendly. You can't really have multiple steps in your forms, and users must. This is kind of a catch-all here that is sometimes a showstopper. Users must have read-write access to your SharePoint list that these guys are writing to, which is, and I say it's a showstopper sometimes because in many cases, think of HR grievance forms or any forms running on a public-facing website. You don't want to give these folks read access to that list. So that poses a problem too. So there's limitations for the list form in that area. In fact, this might be a good segue, Joe. If you want to hand me the presenter, I will show them because, okay.
I think this does. Yeah, go ahead and grab it. I do think that this is a good transition to right where your solution picks up.
Yeah, just to show you guys real quick here, let me pull up a browser. In the spirit of keeping your data in SharePoint and taking advantage of all the SharePoint capabilities, the Smart Forms module is just a web part, and that's what you're seeing here on the screen right now. So it's a web part. Anyone familiar with it can drop it on the page, and they can configure this web part. This is actually it, and then I can fill this form out. You can see that these fields are actually required. This is a very simple example, guys. This is a vacation request. And it has a couple steps to it, but it writes to a list. It writes to this list. This is a standard SharePoint list, 2013. You have all the SharePoint capabilities. I can connect it to, Access, export this data. This form writes to that list. So what I do is I drop it on the page. I point it to a list. I tell it what fields I want, and I click OK, and then I have my form. And so from the end user perspective, it's a responsive design. It's highly mobile friendly. It honors all of your SharePoint list validation. So if it's a required field, regular expression validation, if it's a date time picker, people picker, drop down, radio button, so on and so forth. And working with this is a very low learning curve as well. So because it's a web part.
I know you said responsive. I think some people may not necessarily understand. What mobile devices does this work on?
Oh yeah, good question, Joe. So responsive design, it's a design methodology that allows you to build something that will work across any mobile device. It cares more about the size of the screen that you're on. So in this example, I've got 2 columns. Maybe I'd have 3 columns or 4 columns. What happens is if you view this from your iPhone or your Android, it's going to stack these columns on top of each other. It's going to shrink everything down, and it's going to make it fit and look beautifully on that screen. So it's not necessarily caring about your operating system of the device. It cares about your screen size. That's what responsive design is. Most websites are going that direction. Our products are all in that direction, including your forms, which is kind of tough to fill out a form when you got to scroll around all over the place, right?
Great.
So I'm going to put the web part in edit mode and just show you. There's really nothing to be afraid of. The learning curve, you'll know how to work it just from here. I'm going to click configure the form. It's going to bring up the form building interface. Then you see these different tabs. This is where I tell it what list to post to. It's important to understand it can even write across site collections. That's pretty awesome. That means that I can have a form here that's writing to a list that should and does live someplace else. Pick your list here. This next tab called columns, you pick your column layout. How many columns do you want your form to have? You can choose up, all the way from 1 to 4. I don't recommend going 4, but a lot of customers do, particularly in the government space. You put check boxes next to the fields that you want. You tell it what column you want it to be in, first column, second column, third column, fourth column, so on, what order. You can default the values, and you can even get the default value for that particular field out of the URL if you want to. After you specify all that information at the bottom, you can allow attachments, you can display field descriptions. What's important to understand here is this runs under elevated privileges, which means that you can allow people to write to a SharePoint list and lock down that list so they can get data into it, but they are not allowed to read a single item in that list. And a lot of customers take advantage of that. For those examples I mentioned earlier, you don't always want to give people read-write access to your SharePoint list just because you want to capture data from them. The Buttons tab gives you control over the look and feel of the buttons and the behavior. You'll have forms that are multi-step forms where your submit button should say next. And if that's the case, you just type in next. But you could also use an image if you want to. And it doesn't even have to be a form button. It can be just linked text if you want. It's completely, that's the look and feel portion of it. The behavior is right here. You can have forms that are multi-part forms where you paste in the landing page for the part 2, part 3, part 4, so on and so forth, or the thank you page. But then there's also the need for forms that are more of a repetitive data entry situation, and you want to blank out the form and prepare it for the next entry. And if that's the case, you just specify whatever thank you text you want to display. Hey, thanks. It went in great. Please enter your next item. You can specify parameters to pass. That's getting a little bit more technical, but if you want to pass parameters to your landing page, you can. You have all these same options for the cancel button. You don't even have to show a cancel button. And the cancel options on the button is pretty much exactly like the submit button. Display options, also getting a little nerdy here, but it's here if you want to. We ship it with CSS that's actually Section 508 compliant, so be careful if you want to dork around with the look and feel of your forms, but it's completely within your power. A lot of customers will play around with the CSS and make it feel and look exactly the way they want to, beyond just inheriting as much of your SharePoint site's look and feel as it can, which it'll also do. Also, if you guys, anyone's using public-facing websites, you would definitely want to have this nowadays. You don't want to have a form there without some type of validation, anti-spam bot situation. So that's what this is. It's free. You can go to Google. I'm sure you've seen these before. You plug in your public key and your private key, and it's going to put this on your form, and it will not pass validation until the human being types in this stuff, thusly proving that they're a human and not some kind of robot.
Very important on SharePoint list. I mean, the spammers, anything public-facing, day one, people pick up your forms and totally spam the heck out of your comments and stuff. It's horrible.
That's right. That's right. And then the last tab, guys, is just a lot of times you want to send off an email when someone submits this form. So this data is going to your SharePoint list. You can use email alerts on that list, and they'll get fired off. You can have awesome workflows on that list, and they'll get fired off. But beyond that, you may also want to send out an email just here that has the variables of the values that are going into that form submission, and you can do that here. You can come here, specify the to address. That can be a variable that you're capturing. If you're capturing someone's email and you want to send them a thank you for filling out the form or whatever. And CC, BCC, a lot of customers will BCC their CRM systems, subject line, and of course here's the body, and you can put variables in all of these fields. And so you'll save and close. I'm going to actually hit cancel, and then you're done. You'll have your form, and that's it. That's the learning for this. It's a webpart. Drop it on a page. Tell it what list you want. You'll play around with it to make it look pretty with, oh, no, it doesn't look great with 2 columns. Let's try 3 columns or so on and so forth. But it's pretty, it's a pretty good tool. Our customers love to have this tool in their SharePoint toolbox to supplement building their forms. And sometimes it's the only tool they use, but often it's, you know what, this guy's going to get the job done for 80% of our forms. The other 20%, we need a developer to write code, because it's super, we have all this logic in there that just needs to be coded, whether they have InfoPath or not. A real developer has to write code in InfoPath to make those forms do anything. that's sophisticated. So that's pretty much it. The high level. You guys can download this for free. It's a free trial. I recommend getting a hold of it and trying it out, and just let us know what you think. And there's like a 30-day free trial you can download from our website. So with that, I'm going to switch it back over to Mr. Joe Olson. And we're up against the clock right now, Joel.
Yeah, I got that, yep. And I want people to start putting their questions in as we move this along. I know we don't have a lot of time, and so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mention these real briefly. We talked already about what an Excel form looks like. Here's one example of how you can see people building forms in Excel and how it might populate in Excel. And another one that's basically a structured document in Word where you can actually build forms right in Word, which gives you this great offline experience and then gathers this data that can then be pulled in. And the apps, obviously, again, this is an area where it's sky's the limit, but one kind of example of an access-based app that was built to gather data. And what I like about the slide is here you're kind of giving more detail about your app here, and I'm going to let you announce this little discount.
Oh yeah, guys, just real quick, you can download the free trial from Kintivo.com. Anybody that wants to later on, if they like it and then purchase it because you attended this webinar, these coupon codes are available for you. There's 3 versions. It's you'll use the 2007, 2010, or 2013 coupon code respectively to save $50 on the purchase of this. This is something that one of your considerations for when you're looking at third-party solutions. There's a handful of options available to you, including our product. But either way, when you're evaluating these third-party solutions, make sure you consider what's actually being sold to you. Are you researching a solution for SharePoint forms, which, in my opinion, again, should post to a SharePoint list. So you can use your existing SharePoint functionality like workflows, like Office integration, versioning, email alerts, records retention, security training, so on and so forth. Or are you being, are you looking at something or being sold a workflow engine that happens to have forms? That's a big difference. And of course, cost is always a consideration. Will the solution require a ton of training, or will it hit the ground running? Can you start building forms right out of the gate? Do you need a developer to be trained on this third-party product? Not unlike InfoPath. You've got to kind of be a technical guy or girl to be able to build something sophisticated with InfoPath. And that's why you can do all of these cool things, because you can write custom code with InfoPath. So, a lot of our customers come over from InfoPath because they discovered, well, if we're writing custom code anyway, why do we even need InfoPath? Why don't we use, this is a custom one-off InfoPath form, why don't we just make it a custom one-off form, period, .NET, and deploy it? So that's one consideration. And also, you got to consider what's happening with this data. Do you want your data to be turned into an XML file? And InfoPath does it that way, and these other third-party products also be careful, because if that's where you want it to go, you need to make a mental note of that. Or do you want to make it more end-user friendly, like a real human being actually entered this into a list? And if it's more end-user friendly, obviously, as soon as that form is submitted, it can be used. A real human being can look at that. They don't have to sift through XML or do anything fancy with it. It's in a SharePoint list. So those are some considerations that you need to, I would recommend keeping those in mind, particularly, the cost and the format of where that data is actually going, what you're playing, because once it's in SharePoint list, you can very easily make it XML, but you're not locked into XML from the beginning. You can very easily export it to Excel. You can very easily work with it with Microsoft Access. But once it's in that SharePoint list, there's an awful lot you can do. And just be careful. Quite frankly, a lot of these guys, it may be a workflow engine being sold as a SharePoint form solution at the end of the day. That's it, Joe.
All right, thanks a lot. Well, thanks a lot, Sean. We do have a. We're going to spend a couple of minutes. I know some people are going to have to drop off, but feel free to tweet. I've got my Twitter address up there as well as Sean. Feel free to tweet us. Thanks for spending your time. I know time is valuable, and I hope that a lot of people are educated more around what Microsoft's sharing and has said about InfoPath, but also hopefully it's filled in some of the blanks around future strategy and helping you understand how to really approach forms and being able to see that cool solution. I think it was pretty cool. It's very simple. I think that's something that definitely makes it stand out. There are a lot of third parties in this space, and I think something that definitely stands out with what you showed today was how simple it was, and the idea that it pushes data into SharePoint, which definitely makes it more native.
Yep. I would encourage you guys to give it a free try. Certainly a tool that our customers enjoy, particularly the folks that are familiar with SharePoint. They enjoy having that web part available to them when they get that request. Hey, I just need a form to collect this one thing. Not having to tap a developer, that's a big deal. So thanks again, everybody, so much for attending. Let us know if you have any questions whatsoever. And till next time, you guys take care.